Good morning and thanks for tuning in to Harbor Online. We're happy to have you with us. My name is Mary Peters and I'm here with my sister and her family.
I'm Pauline.
I'm Paul.
I'm Kevin.
I'm Nate.
Something that we've really been enjoying about Harbor.Church Online is just being able to connect with our Harbor.Church family or being able to just have a cup of coffee, go sit out on the patio and enjoy the message. If it's your first time joining us for Harbor.Church Online, welcome. We're so happy to have you with us, and we know you'll be inspired by the message. Now, next Sunday, on June 14th, we'll be doing our lawn church service at Harbor. So please stay tuned until the end to hear more about that.
Now we're going to take a minute to honor our 2020 graduates who have worked so hard and stuck it through a very difficult year. So we want to give them a big congratulations, and then we'll get into some worship and then the message. So stay tuned.
Good morning. Welcome to Harbor Church Online. We're so glad that you've tuned in with us this morning. We're going to do a little bit of worship right now. So feel free to get up, stand up off your couch, make everybody here in your house feel uncomfortable as we sing Drenched in Love.
blood of Jesus. How priceless, how precious. There's power in the blood of Jesus. How priceless, how precious. There's power in the blood of Jesus. There's power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. With Christ my Lord, now I am raised to life forevermore. My name's been carved upon your heart. No, not death, no, not hell could ever rip us apart. We're singing, oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know. I am washed, I am washed, I am drenched in love. I am washed, I am washed, I am drenched in love. I am washed, I am washed, I am drenched in love.
Good morning, Harbor.Church. Welcome, man. Happy Sunday. I hope you're doing well. My name is Josh. If you're new to Harbor.Church Online, maybe you've never had a chance to come to one of our services or even watch one, my name is Josh. I'm the pastor of Harbor.Church, and I'm thrilled that you're with us and that you're joining us today. I'm actually coming to you from my neighborhood. I'm standing on the shore of Snake Pond, and you'll be able to hear some birds chirping. I can actually hear a helicopter right now from the base, so we'll have some cars driving by, and I know that you're mature enough not to get distracted by that. And if you are, just lean in a little bit, because I'm excited about what we're going to be talking about today. We're talking about our neighborhoods, our community, and I thought what better way to teach today's message than to come to you from my community. I think that we have a great opportunity to learn from the story that's sandwiched in the middle of Genesis, in the book, chapter 11 of Genesis. It comes between two really cool stories. There's the story of Noah and the ark, and we'll look at that later this year. There's a story of a man named Noah who builds an ark, who obeys God when God says, do something difficult, build a boat, because I'm going to flood the earth. I'm going to wipe out all mankind because man is so wicked and so jacked up and so corrupt. And God provides a way for Noah and his family to escape that destruction. And that takes place in, I think, chapter 6 through 9 of Genesis. And then in chapter 12, you have the story of Abraham. And Abraham, at the time he's called Abram, his name gets changed to Abraham. God makes him a great nation and pulls him out of Ur of the Chaldees and sets him on a journey to become the father of many nations, ultimately the Israelite people. So you have the story of Abraham, you have the story of Noah. And then right sandwiched between these two awesome stories of obedience and following after what God wants, you have Genesis chapter 11. It's called the story of the Tower of Babel. And it's actually a story of disobedience. And I want to read that to you today. And many of you have probably never heard this story before. It's okay. It's only 9 verses, but these 9 verses have played a lasting impact on us today. These 9 verses reshaped the world. And for those of you that don't know this story, I want you to hear it today, but I want you to understand why it's in here and what we can learn from about being a part of a community. So it says this, and we'll just go verse by verse. First off, it starts by letting us know in chapter 10, it gives us Noah, after he gets off the ark, his sons and their wives, they begin to have kids and repopulate. And so it gives us a whole bunch of generations. And so now the earth is becoming crowded. And God tells them, hey, I love you. I'm never going to flood the earth again. I'm going to give you the rainbow to remember that I'm never going to destroy the earth through water. And then he says, I want you guys to spread out and multiply. And he just starts listing all of their kids and their grandkids and their great-grandkids. And then we get to chapter 11. It says this, verse number 1. At one time, all the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words. There's something powerful to a group of people who understand each other. And there's a lot of connection when you're able to speak the same language. But what happens when you stop being able to communicate? You become disconnected, which is what I believe a lot of our problems are today. We're disconnected. We don't speak the same language. Now, this is also speaking literally. I'm speaking to you in English. Many of you that have learned other languages know some of the struggles. I grew up in Germany as a kid. I had to learn to speak German in order to hang out and interact and go to school. For those of you that have learned a second language, you know some of the barriers that are there when you can't communicate the way you want to. Regardless of that, those of us that are speaking English right now, we are struggling to communicate with other people that are also speaking English. Just because you speak the same language doesn't mean you actually understand each other. Some of you know that to be true in your marriages right now, in your families with your kids. I spoke last week about coworkers, bosses, and employees. You can speak the same language but have no clue what each other is saying because you're so disconnected. So there's a literal translation here, and there's also a metaphorical application. That as the people migrated east, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia, or some versions say the plain of Shinar. So this is basically letting us know they settled there, and settling means they were done moving. They weren't going to go anywhere else. So that's actually important to why this is such a disobedient story. Verse number 3. Before we get to all that, let's give us a little bit of facts that we need to learn. Verse number 3 says this. They began saying to each other, remember they're talking the same language, let's make bricks and harden them with fire. In this region, bricks were used instead of stone, and tar was used for mortar. So fire kiln bricks were much, much stronger. Archaeologists have uncovered these Babylonian, what looks like pyramids. They're Babylonian pyramids, so they're very stair steps. They didn't have the smooth sides, and they're called ziggurats. And in the middle of them would be clay bricks, but on the outside they would use, for the hard outer structure of the pyramids, they would use fire kiln. Like they would bake these stones, and those were much, much stronger and would last much, much longer. And that's important to understanding the mindset of these people as they struggled. They wanted to build something that would last. They wanted something that they were going to pitch with tar. So this tar part, where it says that they had tar for mortar, it's important. The Bible gives us that for a reason. This was the same stuff that Noah used a few chapters earlier to do what? To waterproof the ark. We find that same verbiage used again in the book of Exodus when Moses' mom puts him in a basket and puts him in the river. That same material was used to waterproof that basket. Why did they need to build a tower and build it strong and build it so it would last and build it so that it was waterproof? Well, it lets us know that they didn't really believe God's promise to their great-great-great-great-great-grandfather Noah when God said, I'm not going to flood the earth anymore. They didn't believe God's promise on that. So they wanted something tall enough that was waterproof that could outlast a flood, whatever flood came next. Well, they also heard the same story that first flood happened because people were disobedient to God. So what we can infer from this is that they planned on being disobedient to God. They clearly already were in their first actions. And what they were saying is, let's find a way to get around the consequences of what God would do to us if we disobey him. Does that sound familiar? I'm pausing because I think some of you just need to hear this. They were actively working for a solution to the consequences of their sin. They didn't want to do it God's way, so they started to invent ways so that they didn't have to reap the what they were going to sow in their sin. We are actively doing that today. There are people that are actively trying to find ways to do whatever they want, go against what God says is his best, and then they're hoping that they can circumnavigate the fallout. People are willing to have sex with whoever they want. Instead of doing it God's way, and he says, wait till you're married and have sex with one person, we say, hey, I want to have a bunch. And so now we've invented reasons to get around that. We've come up with ways so that there's no consequences for that. We've adapted a culture that says, hey, you don't have to worry about living up to that kind of standard or doing it God's way. We live our lives in a way where we justify our own selfishness, where it's because we have gone after all the materialism of the world and we have pursued all the toys that we can buy for ourselves. Rather than admitting that God told us not to be greedy, we instead have invented a way that says, look at what I've done. I've accomplished something. Look at me. And we've made it a matter of pride instead of something we should be ashamed of. We've acted out in a way, many of us justify our wrongful emotions. We give in to despair and anxiety. We give in to fear. We give in to anger. We allow our emotions to control us. And rather than saying God knows that we're not supposed to be that way. God's told us to be in control of our emotions. Instead, we act out in our emotions and we say, well, I'm just passionate, or I just care more. That's not true. We have to stop looking for ways to circumnavigate God's plan for us. God's best for us is there for a reason. And when we go off of that, we should expect to get screwed up. We should expect there to be problems. We should expect the world to continue to fall apart. The more and more the world deviates from God, the worse it's going to be. Archaeologists have already found some of these, pyramids of that same era and same area that were at least 16 stories tall. I think this one got much bigger than that, but at least, pretty tall, pretty substantial structures, getting up there pretty high. And then the Greek historian named Herodotus, he actually lived about 400 years BC, before Christ. He wrote that the Tower of Babel was still in existence at his time. Thousands of years after this took place. That's not in the Bible, guys. That's ancient manuscripts. This Greek historian, said that he knew of the Tower of Babel and that he himself saw it. And that's the last reference we have, but that was 400 years before Christ, a few thousand years after this story takes place. So whatever they built lasted for a long time. So it says they said, let's build it. Now let's jump in to what comes next, verse number 4. And here's a verse I want to camp out for a second. Then they said, come, let's build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world. So first off, I want you to look at the fact that they said, hey, come, let's build something. Let's work together and let's build a great city for who? For ourselves. And that goes back to that selfishness, to that pride that has plagued mankind from the beginning. We are always on the lookout for ourselves. This is going to tie in at the end, but I want you to remember, at the base root of most of our problems is our pride and selfishness. The more we want for us, the more we look out for us, the more we do opposite of what God called us to do. God told us to love Him and to love others before we love ourselves. The more that we go to making stuff for us, the more we contribute to the problem. The more we are guilty of what these guys are guilty of, which is disobedience to a God who's called us to not look out for us, but instead to care more about what He wants and what others need than we care about what we want. And this is a struggle for us. They say for ourselves. This speaks to their ambition, their greed, to the fact that they build a tower to reach into the heavens, and I'll speak to that here in a second. Speaks to their ambition. I think we pride a lot of ambition, and there is a good to going, man, I want to better, I want to be better, I want to do better, I think God values a spirit of excellence. I think that's good. I think I said last week, if you're working a job, work it with excellence. There should be ambition to go forward, but selfish ambition is a fuel that's never satisfied. Once you begin to go, man, I have to have more, I have to be better, you're going to begin to feed a part of you that's never going to be satisfied, and ultimately it's going to lead to your own destruction. Once you start chasing everybody liking you, yeah, I'm talking to you. Once you start chasing all of those likes, all of those retweets, all of those fake friends, once you start caring about everybody liking you more, and that's what you have the ambition for, be prepared to continue to go after that beast and never find the end. It's never gonna be enough. Many of you, it's not people's opinions you don't care. Some of you do. care way too much, but some of you are like, I don't care about what people think about me. Okay, what do you care about? It's probably money. A lot of you are like, man, I need more. I can't pay my bills. I can't buy the things I want. You begin to pursue money to the point that that becomes the God to you. That's your ambition. I got to have more. If I just have more money, more toys, more things I can buy, more, get a little bit easier for myself. You'll never have enough money. You'll never have enough. For some of you, it's power. It's influence. For some of you, you just need that next title. You need to be recognized. You need to be appreciated. And you're going to pursue that. And because you didn't get that from your dad or from your mom or from your friend or from your husband or from your wife, you're going to look for it from everywhere you can. And you'll pursue unhealthy relationships, and you'll give into horrible actions, hoping to feed that, because it's an ambition that you say, I need people to validate me. I need people to love me this way. I need people to be impressed with me, whatever it is. Ambition has been the downfall. That kind of selfish ambition has been the downfall of man forever. Not only do they say, let's build something for ourselves, they say, we want a tower that reaches into the sky. Some versions say that touch the heavens. This could also be a play on like our word skyscraper. We want something really, really tall. Yeah, we get it. They wouldn't have really, logic says that if they really wanted to reach into the skies on that kind of level, they probably would have built it on a mountain nearby instead of in the plain. But it does speak to their arrogance. It does also speak to their thought process. It wasn't necessarily that they thought they were going to get into outer space, but they thought that there was the earthly realm and then there's the heavenly realm. And if we can just get high enough in the heavenly realm, that's where God is. That's where we can reach a deity. That's where we can figure out what we need to do. It's a reaching beyond what you're limited to right now, and that sounds positive. Like, listen, I know we put men on the moon. I know we've got space exploration. I'm not talking about that stuff. I'm talking about the fact that they actually believed that they could just get away from this earthly realm enough, they could attain a godhood, a deity for themselves. They could attain a knowledge or a power or an ability where they wouldn't need God anymore. And that, as silly as it is that they would think a tower could do that, you and I do the same thing today. Mankind is pursuing every avenue to get rid of God. We've made up excuses for why he doesn't exist. We've chased down a theory of evolution to justify that there was no creation. We've pushed God out of every single circumstance. He doesn't need to be a part of family, he doesn't need to be a part of growth, he doesn't need to be a part of this. The less that we can be accountable to God, the better we feel about ourselves, because if we have to admit that there's a God, then we also have to admit that we're not it. So we try to make ourselves the God of this world, of our own lives, and we push him out as much as we can. And unfortunately, that doesn't work, and it's the same thing that they're trying for. And I need you to understand that today, most occults that you find have roots all the way back to the Tower of Babel. This idea of man trying to reach into a holy deity realm, a godlike realm, to make themselves like God or to reach something that is supernatural, that unhealthy pursuit you see all over today in false religions and satanic things and occultish things. And it goes back to this plan back at the Tower of Babel. Like, let's put God aside and let's see what other powers are out there. Let's see what we can get for us. And I think it's just worthy to note that as dark as that is, that's still something that's very prevalent in the hearts of men and women today. Not only does their rebellious ambition come out in those words, but look what else it says. It says, come, let us make a tower that reaches in the sky. This will make us famous. Another version says, this will make a name for ourselves. We'll make a name for us. We'll make sure the whole world knows our name. You know what I think is crazy? That after we see this picture of a rebellious group of people, the very next chapter starts with a man named Abram. And in Genesis 12:2, God says, I'll make a great name for you. I think it's kind of a cool contrast to when we want to make something for ourselves versus when God says, let me do something for you. Let me be the one that works through you. And you and I have the opportunity to say, God, I'm trusting you more than I'm trusting myself. And unfortunately, a lot of times What we pick is, I would rather do it myself, because if I can earn it, then I don't have to say thank you and I don't have to owe anything to God, and I can prove that I did it. You and I can never do what God can do. From forgiving our own sins and paying the penalty for our mistakes, but also to the fact that he's got better plans for us and can do more through us that lasts for longer than we could ever do for ourselves. But it's a constant struggle. So they said, hey, we want to make ourselves famous. And last but not least, the whole premise behind it was this. This will keep us from being scattered all over the world. It will prevent us from spreading out. Well, why was that? Why would they say that? Because if you go back to Noah and his family, when they get off the ark, God tells them in verse number 1, God blessed Noah and his sons and told them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. The very first verse of chapter 9 of Genesis was God's command. I'm going to bless you. You guys are going to start having lots and lots and lots of kids. But the goal is to fill the earth. Think about how big the planet is. And they wanted to stay in the same geographic location. They did not want to spread out. Why? Because it was scary. God told them to go. And what did they do? They wanted to sit and stay. God told his disciples, go to the uttermost parts of the earth, spread out, and tell everybody about Jesus. And what did his disciples do? They sat down in Jerusalem. They told people in Jerusalem, I'll tell people nearby, I'll tell people in my comfort zone. I'll live for God in my comfort zone, but I'm not going to go outside of that. I'm not going to go where it's scary. I'm not going to step into the dark. I'm not going to be a light where I don't know what's going to happen. If it's not certain for me, if I don't think it's going to be comfortable for me, if it's not going to work out for me, if I'm not going to make a ton of money, if I'm not going to be well liked, if I'm not going to be appreciated, then I'm not going to do it. And those weren't God's commands. God said, go. He said the same thing to them that he's telling you and I. Live out loud. Go and be invested in the places. And I'm not just talking geographically. I don't care if you lived your whole life on Cape Cod and never crossed the bridge. That's fine, as long as you are venturing out to where God has called you to be. And that might be across the aisle at your workplace. Go to the other cubicle and talk to whoever it is, even though you don't like them or don't think that they like you. You're still called to go. It might be about walking 3 doors down in your neighborhood and talking to the neighbor that nobody else in the community likes because God's told you to love that person. It might look like picking up the phone and calling the family member who you burned a bridge with 20 years ago because of something horrible they did, and God told you that you need to forgive others even if they don't ask for forgiveness and even if they don't return forgiveness. That's what getting up and going to the scary places might look like for you today. For the people back then at the Tower of Babel, it just looked like spreading out, and they didn't want to spread out because there was comfort in being around what was familiar. And so they said, we want to keep ourselves from being scattered. God told them in Genesis 9 in verse 1, and he said it again in verse 7, be fruitful and multiply and repopulate the earth. He tells them twice to spread out, and they go, no, we're not going to spread out, and we're going to build a tower so we don't have to spread out. So we see that happen. We see them resisting that call. We see them saying, God, you've put something on me, and I'm just not going to do it. I'd ask you today, are you guilty of resisting the call of whatever it is that God's put you in here for, put you on earth for, put you in your neighborhood for? We're talking about being a part of a community, being part of a neighborhood, being a part of something bigger. Are you actually living out the role that God has made for you? Are you playing the la la la, God, I can't hear you? Come on, we all did that as kids. Okay, just me? Maybe it's just me. I'd always be outside playing. My mom would be like, Josh, time to come in. And I'd be like, I couldn't hear you. Come on, you ever play in a pool? And your mom's like, come on, time to get out of the pool. And you're like, oh, it's underwater. I didn't hear that. Sorry, I'm just still playing. Woo! Come on. We all know what it's like to ignore the call, because if we can just pretend like we didn't hear it or it didn't apply to us, then we can keep having our fun. And God's called you and I to be a light in a dark world. And right now there's a lot of darkness and there's not a lot of people representing light. Let's move on. It says in the next verse, but the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower that the people were building. The fact that the Lord came down, that's kind of a cool verse. A lot of people have speculated on what that means. We don't exactly know if God visited in a spirit form or if this is like a pre-incarnate Christ. There are references in the Old Testament of a physical, tangible person, like who showed up in the fiery furnace, who showed up to talk to Joshua before Jericho. that may have been the same thing. Jesus or the pre-incarnate Son of God may have walked around and looked what was happening there. We don't really know, but I do like the part that it lets us know God came down to check it out. It shows an active interest in how God cares about what we're doing. David wrote that God sees everything all over the planet. God is omnipresent. If you are curious if God is interested in you, the answer is yes. If you're wondering, did God see me yesterday? He did. If you're asking, does God see me right now, sitting there on my couch, sipping a coffee? He does. Or wherever you're at. If you're listening to this, driving in your car, and it's on a podcast, he sees you. If you're checking this out 5 years from now, he sees you. God sees everything, and he's absolutely interested in what you're doing. And that speaks to both the good and the bad of what you're doing. Verse number 6 says this. It's starting to rain on me, so I'm going to have to hurry up. Some of you are like, sweet. He needs to preach outside more often. All right, verse number 6. It says, look, he said, the people are united and they all speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. That's a crazy verse that God is speaking. He says, mankind is doing this. They're all speaking the same language. They're all working together. They have a mind to work. Nothing will be impossible. It doesn't mean that literally they were going to become gods. And I've heard people say that. That's not what God was saying. But he says the potential here is pretty terrible. The potential for mankind is pretty horrific. God had already destroyed the earth a few years before this with the flood because of how evil and broken man became. Oh, Josh, I don't believe that. Pastor, I think you're exaggerating. Look what Hitler and a few men were able to do, how much evil could happen in the world just in the past 20th century. When a group of people band together, they can unleash some very destructive, heavy evil. On the opposite side, when a group of people band together, they can also do a great work in the positive. The problem is that mankind is innately broken. We introduced the curse. We brought sin in. When Adam and Eve did they did something they weren't supposed to do. When they disobeyed God, sin entered the world. And because sin starts in each of us, every single person watching this or listening to this, you have a sin nature in you. You were born that way. You didn't have to be taught to be broken. You didn't have to be taught to steal or to lie. That's just something you naturally have because of the sin that's in you and I, that we got passed on to us from Adam to Noah to these people to Abraham, so forth and so on. Everybody's had it passed on to them from their great-great-great-grandfathers and so forth. We don't have to worry about the fact is, are we guilty of this as well? No, we have the same potential for evil. We need something greater than ourselves to pay for our sin and to give us a better path forward. That's the gospel message, is that Jesus overcame the evil that you and I are born with, that he paid the price for all the mistakes, all of the sin, all of the wrong that we've ever done, and he gives us a better path forward. But what God is saying here in this passage is he says, man, the potential, the massive potential for evil here when mankind comes together and puts his mind to something, man, it's sad. There's always been an evil versus good element at play. And God has always been trying to help you and I know his perfect will. The cool thing is that God has overcome the world. He tells us that we don't have to fear this world because he has beat it. But we still have to give in to him, because you and I, we don't win on our own. And that's our struggle. And it was the struggle for the people of Babel here. They didn't want to trust God. They wanted to do their own thing. And doing your own thing, even if you're a good person, will ultimately lead to some depravity. This is a cool verse. God, after coming down and walking around in verse 6, says, come, let's go down and confuse the people with different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other. A couple things I want you to notice real quick. First, God says, come on, let's multiple go down. It's a reference to the Trinity. If you don't believe that God exists in three different beings, like I know some of you have probably not heard this before, so I'm going to try to say it this way. God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit are three in one, three separate but yet unified in one, and this verse referenced that. But it's also cool that if you look in verse number 3, the people of Babel say, hey, let us go make some bricks And then in verse 4, they say, let us go build a tower. So they're saying, let us go do this, let us go do that. And then in verse 7, you have God saying, let us go to go take care of it. So what you have is man's choices 2 times and then God's reaction. And it's that same saying 3 times, let us go do this, let's go do this. And the fix to it was God's fix to it, which I thought was pretty cool. God's promise. And the intent was there. It says that they won't be able to understand each other. There was a design to changing the language, because when you and I don't understand each other, it forces us to spread out. It forced them to go, and we'll see that here in the next couple of verses. But don't be surprised. I'm just trying to take some of this mystique away for you. Don't be surprised that you don't understand some people. That happens. It's okay. We live in a broken world with sin consequences for broken decisions, and some of the consequences are that we just don't understand each other. You will not understand everything you see on TV. You will have your experiences, and because your experiences dictate what you see and what you felt and what you know, when somebody else has a different experience, you will struggle to understand them. And it will drive you nuts. You're like, why do they do that? And why do they say that? And listen, I'm speaking to both sides of the aisle here. You need to understand that you won't always get everybody's point of view and what they see. The whole point here was that we were never going to be in lockstep 100% of the time with 100% of the people. It's just not going to happen. We won't have that again this side of eternity. We won't have that till we're in heaven, where all of us, all the time, walk together in all the ways. We're jacked up. We're never going to be at complete peace with each other. So don't make that the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal should be for you to be at peace with God, and recognize that you're probably never going to truly understand everybody else. That sounds like a well duh, but I feel like some of you needed to hear it. We move on. It says in verse number 8, in that way the Lord scattered them all over the world, and they stopped building the city. A lot of people have preached that God changing their languages and scattering them was his punishment for building the tower. It could be, I get that. But I believe it's actually his mercy. I believe it was less a punishment and more his mercy. He spreads them out so that he didn't have to bring them down. And I believe that sometimes you and I experience God's moving in our life because we're stupid. And I say that freely knowing that's me. And if you can't admit that today, sorry. But some of you should be putting up the emoji hands, be like, right here, that's me. I'm on that team stupid. Sorry, but I do a lot of dumb things. And what happens is God moves in our life, and we just always assume it's a punishment. God changed my language. God scattered me from the Tower of Babel. God is so mean. God was doing that because if they continued on that path, they were going to royally screw up. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to save them that screw up and that punishment. So what he does is he provides a different way. And actually, the pain of them having to have a new language, they didn't even have to develop it and write it. God just put it in their brains, and they immediately spoke that language. It was a supernatural interaction that started what is truly a linguistics miracle of people being able to speak a different language. And I'll speak to that here in a second, because verse number 9 says this: that is why the city was called Babel, because that is where the Lord confused the people with the different languages in the way he scattered them all over the world. And these different languages, modern day linguists, they have admitted that mankind cannot have invented his own language. Now, there are spin-offs and there's dialects, and some of the things that we have been like hand down, over generations, and they've developed their own language. But if you go back to the root of languages, modern day linguists have come to the conclusion that mankind couldn't have just invented those any more than he could have invented his own circulatory system. So how they explain it is they literally say there must have been a unique phase of evolution that allowed for mankind to have this evolution of languages for these different languages. Because there's something about the way we're wired, and I don't truly understand this. If we were just to set out, me and you were to sit down and try to invent our own languages separate from each other, like, okay, we would just pick noises and sounds that would be the same. And that's not true throughout all languages. There's such a difference and a complexity here. And because they can't allow themselves to admit that there's a God or that there was ever a Tower of Babel, they just say, hey, we think it must have been some freak evolutionary thing. Well, the Bible tells us that it happened right here. And this moment is when the world changed forever and people were forced to spread out and cover the globe. Because their linguistics separated them, it gave them a chance to have geographical separation. Now, I want you to stop and think through this complexity of the languages, forcing them into different smaller groups, forcing them to kind of depend on a much smaller amount of people. What that must have looked like to have to go out and then find a new territory and adapt to that territory, to trust those people. It slowed down a lot of the evil that was going to happen if they had stayed together. Matthew Henry says this, that since the time of Babel, a lot of time has passed. Since the story of the Tower of Babel, a lot of time has passed. And in that time, we've made a lot of advancements, a lot of organization. He says a lot of government, a lot of technology. And what has that made us? It has made us better off, but it hasn't made us better. A lot of stuff has changed since the Tower of Babel, and we've done a lot, spread out into a bunch of different groups, different races, different technologies, different advancements, first world, third world. A lot of things have changed from then, and we've been able to develop a lot of stuff, but we're not better off, or we're not better. We have air conditioning now, but we're not better. Here's the problem, guys. The problem has always been the heart. I want you to hear me this morning because I'm done. The problem with community, the problem with your neighborhood, the problem with your family, with your marriage, the problem with you, the problem with this world has always been and will always be their heart. Their heart is far from God. God is perfect and righteous and holy, and our sin separates us from him. And when you go opposite of perfect, righteous, holy, you lean into pride, selfishness, arrogance, greed, hate, racism, bigotry. You have people that make dumb decisions. You have evil that takes place. The problem with those police officers in Minneapolis is the same problem with the people rioting in Minneapolis. They have a depraved heart. They're in a situation where they're able to lean into the sin that's naturally growing in them. Whether that's an anger or a frustration, whether that's a bitterness, whether that's a pride, a complexity where they think that they're better or that they deserve more. Are we called to stand up for what's right? Absolutely we are. We are. I think that's what God wants us to do in our communities. But I need you to understand something, and I know some of you are not going to appreciate this. I've never put my hope in police officers. But I've also never put my hope in protests. I've never put my hope in our government. And I'm not putting my hope in a vaccine or in some bill getting passed. It's okay to want that stuff. It's okay to use your voice and your platform and your influence to make positive changes. I'm asking you not to make that your world, not to make that your God, not to make that your idol, that this thing has to happen this way, because truthfully the Bible tells us that the world is continuing to devolve, that sin will continue to grow. There will be spikes as men and women of God lean into what God has called them to do, and they get down on their knees and they beg a God for forgiveness, a righteous and holy God who said that he will take away their sins. When men and women do that and they experience forgiveness from God, then they see God working, and those same men and women, boys and girls, when they have that and they go, I want to take this out. I want my neighbors to see this. I want my community to see this. I want the people around me to feel God working in a powerful way. Then we see light happen. We see a light that gets shined into the dark recesses of humanity, into our culture. We see the cockroaches flee. We watch the things that are broken in our society, in our government, that's just a pandemic taking place throughout all of what's going around us. It's unique to watch when God works through his people to have positive impact and change. Now listen, I want good. I truly do. I want things to be better. I want my neighborhood to be good. I want our streets to be safe. I want justice for the oppressed. Those are things that we should want, and to turn a blind eye to that is to do a disservice to who God has called you to be. At the same time, if you put all of your faith in that, you're turning your back on what God has called you to do, which is to put your faith in him. Well, Pastor, you spoke today about all the greed and the ambition and the selfishness. Aren't I doing it right when I'm loving others? Yeah, you're supposed to. And here's the thing. I see people very passionate on TV, on Instagram, on Facebook. I see people passionately trying to help others, and they should. And not all of them are believers. I see some people who don't even believe in God showing love for their neighbor in a way that should be indicative and reflective of a Christian. And I see Christians folding their arms and not doing anything, and I think that's really sad. But here's the truth that those people, and I think some of you don't recognize. Loving others is incredibly important, and it takes us away from that loving myself to go and to take a stand for what's right, to try to be a part of the solution, to try to be better, to try to do better is incredibly important. But if it ends with your love for others, then you've missed out. The rule that Jesus says is, he says, here's the most important. I'm going to simplify the whole Bible down for you. Here's the rules you need to remember. Love God with all of your heart, all of your mind, all of your soul. Love God with everything you've got. And then love others the way that you would want to be loved yourself. And so a lot of people, they've come to understand that loving themselves is unhealthy. And so they're reaching out and trying to love others. You can see on TV people who loved themselves too much. But what I also see right now is I see people that love others, and they're hoping that their love for others is going to fix all the problem. The Bible says that our love for others is what will prove to people that we have a love for God. Our love for God, our connection with God, is what should fuel our love for others. And if we stop with just loving other people, then we miss out on the most important part, which is that God needs to be the center of that solution. I feel like the world is on fire right now, and I think now more than ever, men and women who believe in Jesus and have a relationship with him need to start sharing that. And that's the change that we need to see happening. And God might work through you in a different way than he'd work through me, and we might be moved to do something different. Fine, as long as it's spreading the love of Jesus and the knowledge that he's the one that takes away the sin and makes the right wrong, or that makes the wrong right. That's what we need to lean into. Let me pray for you, and we'll close. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord God, thank you so much for who you are, for what you've given us. God, for what you've called us to. God, thank you for the story of the people of the Tower of Babel, a community of people who screwed up, and yet you loved them enough to make a way forward for them. God, they screwed up. They didn't want to answer your call. They didn't want to do the tough thing. They had pride and ambition and arrogance, and yet you still loved them enough to make a way forward for them. And God, you loved us enough to give us a way forward through your Son. You died on a cross for us so that we could not only have forgiveness of our sins, but we could go forward living in victory. And so God, I pray that over every person that's watching or listening to me right now. I pray that they would lean into your word, your promise, that if we would just open the door to you, if we would just allow you access to our life, that you could do more in us and through us than we could ever do on our own. God, I pray for each and every person watching. God, I pray for the turmoil and the distress that's going on in our country, for the hate and the brokenness that is out there. God, for the people that are hurting, for the violence that is happening. God, I pray for these people, the ones that know Jesus, to show Jesus to those that don't. God, that's going to require a lot of grace. It's going to require a lot of mercy. It's going to require forgiveness. It's going to require a hard look in the mirror to change the things that aren't what you would call us to be. God, if we have an anger in us that's not healthy, help us find victory over that. We ask for forgiveness of that. God, if we have a racism, a bigotry, God, if we have a hatred or a problem for somebody, if there's something broken and vile and dark in us, God, help us to acknowledge that, to shine a light on that, and to let go of that. God, there's so much brokenness, there's so much pain. God, we ask that you would intervene, that you would help our country, that you would begin to heal this, heal the people that are broken, heal the people that are hurting. God, allow us to be a voice of calm, a voice of reason, but more importantly, a voice of love that points people to you. We ask all of this in your precious and holy name. Amen.
Oh, hey guys. We didn't see you there. We're just sitting here in our lawn chairs practicing for next week. Because it's lawn church. Yes. Parking lot church, really. But we're psyched. Next week, June 14th, we're going to be having our normal online service at 9 o'clock, Facebook Live and on our website. But 10:30 that morning, we're also going to be gathering here, socializing and distancing, making sure everybody's safe. We're going to have another church service at 10:30.
Yeah, I'm psyched. It's going to be
It's gonna be
exactly the
awesome.
same, so like you do not have to attend both. If you're not comfortable coming out, we got the 9 a.m. streaming live for you. But if you are ready to be out in public, see some faces
In
from
the
a distance,
sunshine.
yes, enjoy our wonderful parking lot that was just freshly landscaped. Come out here at 10:30 next Sunday. Bring your chair, bring something to drink, maybe some snacks, whatever. It's going to be super chill. We're going to be outside, but we're going to have the same message. We're going to have worship. You're going to get to see your church family. We cannot wait to be together again. It's going to be a blast.
Yeah.
All right. That's mainly all we're excited about right now. I do want to mention, if you want to give and be a part of Harbor in that way, you can do so online at Harbor.Church.com/give. You can text any amount to 84321, or you can send a check the old-fashioned way, but those are all options. And I think we're good to go. We're going to soak in the sunshine a little more. We got our Harbor koozies, a fresh seltzer.
Hope for the thirsty.
Cheers, my friend.
Cheers.
See you next week.